Have you ever felt like God was asking you to do something that didn't make sense? I mean, I'm not talking about something immoral, just something that didn't make sense. Now, for some of us here this morning, we may be thinking that's kind of odd to even think that God speaks to people. And you're not there yet, and that's okay. But maybe you would even have to admit, you're here and you don't know why. You're watching online right now and you don't know exactly why. I mean, you got up this morning and you got dressed and you showed up here almost against your own will, although nobody made you come. Or you opened up that computer and started that stream and you don't know why you did. Or maybe you've been following Jesus for a long time now and you're excited about what God is doing in you and through this community of faith here at Blue Ridge. But even you would say, you know what? There have been times in my journey with God, my journey with Jesus, that it felt like he asked me to do something that it didn't feel like he had all the information. That he didn't feel like he understood all the facts. It didn't make sense why he was asking me to do this. Have you ever felt like God was asking you to do something you didn't understand, didn't make sense? For my family, my wife and I, this came in the form of a woman who was 7.5 months pregnant 8 years ago, standing on our front doorstep. And for many of you know our story, but many of you don't. And she was asking us to adopt the baby girl that was inside of her. Now, over the next couple of weeks and months of that process, there were all sorts of questions and concerns that I didn't have the answers to, that I couldn't answer, all these things that didn't make sense. Some of those I still don't know. Wondering, what if she changes her mind? Like, what if she changes her mind? What if we get our heart all wrapped up in this process and then she changes her mind and we're left heartbroken? What if she's lying to us? She had a drug problem and she was saying she hadn't used while she was pregnant. What if she was lying to us about that? What about this unborn baby's extended family? How are we gonna deal with and walk with the extended biological family? What if, as this child grew up and got older and grew up in our home, what if because she didn't have the same DNA, what if she felt like she didn't belong or wasn't as connected to our family? It wouldn't have been true, but what if she felt that way? How are we gonna explain all of this to her? What if our families didn't understand? What if our families treated her differently? Where were we gonna find the money to pay for all of this? And the questions go on and on and on about all the reasons this didn't make sense, all the reasons this was crazy to keep on going in this process. We weren't doing this because we couldn't have biological children of our own. We could do it the old-fashioned way. We had already proven that. So there was all these reasons not to continue, but my wife and I would tell you, standing 8 years later, we've both said this, we couldn't imagine now our family looking any different. We couldn't. Have you ever been in a place where you felt like God or Jesus was asking you to do something that didn't make sense? Well, I'm about 27 years into this whole following Jesus deal. And along the way in my own life, in the lives of other people I see following Jesus, and as I read through the Bible, I see time and time and time again, Jesus inviting people, God inviting people on this journey with him. And largely how we respond to that governs our experience with him. It governs whether or not we experience lifeless religion or a life-giving relationship. Lifeless religion or a life-giving relationship. And here's the deal. I think many of us would love to experience a life-giving relationship with him. In fact, I think this time of year speaks to that. You see, much like gym membership, okay, where this time of year, gyms are packed and new memberships, and maybe you're there, you've already signed up, you got your new trainer and all that kind of stuff. Much in the same way, this time of year, over basically the next month and a half, we will see a huge spike in attendance. And let me say, I love that. I do. I love it because here's what that tells me. It tells me that there are many of us here who are dissatisfied with our current way of living. We want something more than what we're experiencing now in life. And we believe maybe in some way this may be part of the answer. But I'm here to tell you, how we respond to Jesus' asks, how we respond to his invitation is gonna largely determine how much of him we experience, whether we step into just another lifeless religion or we step into a life-giving relationship. And so, before we continue and I connect some dots to how this fits with what we're talking about, would you mind praying with me? Jesus, I am so grateful for New Year's. And this is a new decade, and they are just natural places time and time again where many of us, culture, it's a chance to start new. It's a chance to change old things, to lean in new ways. And so I do pray that you would leverage the power of your Spirit today and in this next season, how it is you want to change us. And you would leverage this new decade, this new year to do that. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. So, just a bit of a review here so we can catch up and I can connect some dots here. Last week, we began a new series where we're asking the question, what is a disciple? Now, you may go, well, why are you asking that question? And I understand that. You see, one of the things Woody said last week, he said it several times over the last couple months or so, is that, and we may not be aware of this, do we know that Jesus never invited anyone to become a Christian? He never invited anybody to become a Christian. In fact, we spend so much of our time in the Western church talking about becoming a Christian when that wasn't Jesus' invitation. That wasn't his ask. His ask to the masses, his ask that extends to us is to become his disciple. But we may not see why being a disciple is that big of a deal. We may miss it because it's not a term we use really in everyday life, right? It's not something that's really in our culture, this whole idea of being a disciple really to anything. And so I think it gets lost. And so last week, Woody began to give us a framework for answering this question, what is a disciple? And he introduced a section that Mark wrote for us in Mark chapter 1, where he records Jesus and his invitation to his first disciples. It says this, Mark chapter 1, verse 16, it says, passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, he, Jesus, saw Simon and Andrew. Now, Simon would later become known as Peter, and over the next couple of weeks, we're gonna see a lot of Peter because we're gonna look at the other disciples and things like that, but we know the most about Peter because he's talked about the most, so we're gonna see him a lot. So he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And this is the invitation. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. And immediately they left their nets and followed him. And so we begin to see this threefold kind of invitation by Jesus to these fishermen to become his disciple. That he invites them to come and follow him. He invites them that along with following him, he's gonna make them into something new. He invites them into this process of living for something bigger than themselves, joining this bigger story where he's redeeming and rescuing people. And he invites them on mission with him. And so to make this a bit stickier, Woody gave us a phrase or three phrases that kind of will help us start to answer the question, what is a disciple? And we saw a disciple is someone who is following Jesus, is being made like Jesus, and is on mission with Jesus. A disciple is someone who is following Jesus, is being made like Jesus, and is on mission with Jesus. Would you guys say this along with me at both campuses? A disciple is someone who is following Jesus, is being made like Jesus, and is on mission with Jesus. One more time. A disciple is someone who is following Jesus, is being made like Jesus, and is on mission with Jesus. So that's the beginning framework of answering this question, what is a disciple? But Woody went further to kind of give us a visual you saw in the bumper, to help us kind of connect, because I know many of us are visual learners. And he drew 3 circles. Each circle standing for one of these aspects. A disciple is someone who is following Jesus, is being made like Jesus, and is on mission with Jesus. Now here's the deal. Where these overlap right here, right there, where these circles come together, that's the life of Jesus, i.e., that's the life that the disciple is looking to imitate, to mimic. Now, he also introduced me to a new word a few months ago that may have not been a new word for you last week, but it's this whole idea of centripetal, not centrifugal force that pulls things apart, but centripetal that pushes things together. And he talked about this whole idea of centripetal force, where these circles, as we're following, as we're being made, as a disciple is living on mission with Jesus, as we're doing those things, these circles start getting pushed together, and more of them start to overlap. So they're looking more and more like one circle, and this center starts to grow. And this is the part where the disciple's life begins to change, begins to look different, as Jesus' life becomes more of our life. As Jesus' life here becomes more representative in the way that we live, everything about us begins to transform more and more from the inside out. It's where we start living for something larger than the 80-year blip that most of us will live on this earth, but we start to live in this eternal identity as his disciple, where we get brought into these moments where we're being made and transformed and changed from the inside out, where we're following him more and more into all sorts of places where he is moving and doing his thing of bringing his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And it's in this, as that part takes over more and more of my life, as that part takes over more and more of the disciples' life, that we become these new creations, created in advance to do a good work. It's where we reflect who Jesus is. That's the life of the disciple. And so, over the next few weeks, we're gonna be looking at each one of these circles. And today we're gonna start with follow. We're gonna start by looking at this whole idea of following Jesus. Now, I think one thing we all can understand is following is easy when we're excited, right? So I'm gonna give you the takeaway to this talk right in the beginning, okay? I'm gonna give you the main point right away. It's what I hope you would take away from this. So if you get bored or get distracted, or need to leave, you'll have the takeaway. So here's the deal. This whole idea of following indicates there's somewhere that Jesus is leading, but it's bigger than that. It's not just that he's leading someplace. It's not just that he's going someplace and wanting us to follow. It's that he's inviting us. His invitation to follow is that he actually wants us to be with him. See, he could accomplish all of this without us. But his invitation to these fishermen and this invitation to us that extends to us is this whole idea that he wants to be with us. And that's an unbelievable thing, that Jesus, God, the one who spoke the universe into existence, he wants to be with me. It's why you hear us talk so much about a relationship, because that's what he's inviting us into. He's inviting us to follow him into this relationship, to do this together with him. Now, so here's the deal. The part that the disciple is meant to play is not to determine the direction. Is not to start taking the lead at some point. The part the disciple is meant to play is to simply respond with a small 3-letter word. And that word is yes. yes to where Jesus is inviting us to follow. And therefore, and here's the takeaway, the question that the disciple asks is this: what's my next yes? What's my next yes? That's the question that the disciple is constantly asking. What's my next yes? Now, that yes is a lot easier when we're excited about where he's leading, right? Like when we're excited and we're confident in where he's leading, that yes is a lot easier. Take, for example, that first invitation to those fishermen. We see this odd thing to us at the end where it says they immediately left and started to follow him. And we go, that's weird. You know, they left their jobs, they left their families, like without even thinking about it, they just kind of left all of that and began to follow him. Like, that's weird to us. But a little cultural context helps us understand. You see, a rabbi who was a teacher, which is what Jesus was, a religious teacher and leader, was a highly respected person in the first century Jewish culture, highly respected. And an invitation by a rabbi to become his disciple was considered an invitation of honor, and it would have created this great place of excitement inside of us. You see, this whole idea of why a rabbi had a disciple, which is basically a student, a learner, an apprentice. All those things are part synonyms for this whole idea of disciple. The reason why a rabbi would have had a disciple or taken on a disciple or a group of disciples would be to pass along their way of living, pass along their way of teaching, pass along their interpretations of the old Jewish scriptures, to pass that along to them so that they could teach it to other people. And so this rabbi's way of living would outlive the rabbi. It was a way of basically creating legacy in one sense. And so when a rabbi had you as his disciple, it meant that rabbi believed that you were wise enough, that you were driven enough to take what he's teaching you and to learn it and to teach it to other people and to produce more of his way of living, more of his way of mission. So, to be invited by this radical new rabbi, Jesus, because he wasn't a normal rabbi that anybody had seen. His way of teaching was blowing people away. They were hearing things taught in the Jewish scriptures unpacked in ways that they had never heard before. So to be invited by this radical new rabbi that the masses were trying to get near, that the masses were trying to follow, that he was doing these miraculous things to get near to this rabbi and to be invited by him to be his disciple was this unbelievable honor. And so they were excited. So that's why we see it's so easy for them to go, he's inviting us ordinary fishermen to come and be his disciples. Of course, and they immediately drop everything to go and follow him. But as we know, as we'll see from the lives of the disciples, and like what we know about excitement, it tends to fade. And the yeses get more and more difficult when that excitement fades. When we don't understand, or he's asking us to do something that doesn't make sense. But remember, what we do with his invitation to become his disciple will largely govern whether we experience lifeless religion or a life-giving relationship with him, what he's inviting us into. So I want to spend the rest of our time looking at 3 areas when he's inviting us to follow that we can easily miss once the excitement's worn off. So the first one is this: when the yes is scary. When the yes is scary, it can be easy to miss where he's inviting us to follow. There's this episode in Matthew that many of us are familiar with. Jesus has just finished teaching and a long day of teaching a whole group of people. And so he sends these early disciples of his ahead of him across a lake in a boat by themselves. And that's where we pick up, and it says this: shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." And here's Jesus' invitation to Peter, "Come," he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when Peter saw the wind, he was, and here it is, afraid. And he began to sink and cried out to the Lord, "Lord, save me." So we may look at that and go, well, that doesn't seem like that great of an example, Jeremy. Doesn't seem like a very disciple-ish thing of Peter to do because he sank, right? Like he sank, and you would be correct. He sank. But here's the deal. Maybe think about it this way. He was the only disciple that night to take a few steps on the water. In fact, my guess is there's not many of us in this room that have walked on more water than Peter, right? And just think about that. It's all because he was willing to say yes. Yes, when he was scared. And yes, his fear ends up overtaking them. And his fear ends up causing him to begin to sink. But just think about it. Think about what Peter, what he experienced in that moment with Jesus. What he was able to, as they all got to that shore. Think about the other disciples. And they're like, "Did you guys see that?" Like we were all terrified. And Peter, got out in the water and he took 4 steps. Yeah, he ended up sinking. But man, look at the 4 steps he took, right? Can you imagine that moment as they retold that story, as they relived? Can you believe that Jesus actually invited you out on the water with him and you took him up on that and you did that with him? You see, we miss moments like that often. I can miss moments like that because what I see in front of me is what Jesus is inviting me to do. That yes is too scary. This week, it's 20 years since I moved to Lynchburg. And I still remember the conversation that happened a couple months prior to us moving out here that led to us coming out there. You see, and some of you have heard this before, but some of you haven't. See, I lived with 7 guys, and I actually lived in the garage. It was only $50 a month for rent, so absolutely a win. If any of you got a garage, I'll move in for $50. I had to have a 0-degree sleeping bag in the winter because it was Colorado, but hey, it was worth it. So I was out in the garage in my room, and one morning, a roommate of mine, I lived with 7 guys, and his name was Ryan Maston, and he came out into my room, came out to the garage, and he asked me, Ryan was a brand new follower of Jesus. He didn't grow up around Christianity. He didn't have a family that went to church growing up or anything like that. And so he's a brand new follower of Jesus, and he says, "Jeremy, where could I go to learn more about Jesus?" And his question, he was asking what kind of college, university could I go to? Now at that time, I knew of about 3. This was kind of before internet was, still dial up in your home. It wasn't all that common. Not every place had a website, all those kind of things. So I said, I think, I know of a couple, but there's this one, and I had a guy I knew years ago, an adult that went to our church years ago that had gone to this one called Liberty University out in Virginia. I said, there's this one out in Liberty University, or out in Virginia someplace, and I guess you could go there to learn more about Jesus. And so that was really kind of the end of the conversation, and Ryan began to leave my room, and in that moment, I had one of these moments where I felt Jesus was on that shore, and as clear as I could hear my voice in my head, I heard his voice say to me, "Jeremy, will you follow me by offering to go with him? I don't want him to have any excuse not to go as a new follower of mine." Now this did not make sense, and it was super scary. See, I for all intents and purposes, I'd lived nowhere else but this small little town, Durango, Colorado. My family all lived there. My friends were all there. I loved what I was a part of. I loved everything that Colorado offered. I was a Colorado kid. Like this is where I called home. I'd been dating my then girlfriend, now wife, for 2.5 years. There was no reason that made sense other than that call, that invite. It was scary. And I wasn't wise enough, brave enough, didn't have enough faith other than God's grace in that moment. Before Ryan left that room, I said, Ryan, if you go, I'll go with you. And 20 years ago, this week, we showed up. A week later, we showed up to Blue Ridge for the first time. And here's the deal. Looking back 20 years, and I say this because every year it just becomes more and more real. And my wife and I, we talk about this. Janet, I called her up the day that Ryan and I decided, and I said, hey, I know I haven't put a ring on it, but do you want to move out to Virginia? She found her own roommates, I found mine. And girls, ladies, don't follow a guy anywhere. It worked out for us. I'm not saying it'll work out for you, okay? Okay. But we look over the last 20 years of our life and are so thankful that we didn't allow fear and what was scary stand in the way, because we showed up here. And guys, I could point to person after person, family after family that has impacted our lives in this community of faith. We know we wouldn't be where we are with Jesus had it not been for the relationships that Jesus used in this church to form and grow us. I didn't have some master plan of becoming this executive pastor at this church. This was all a part of just that simple yes, and what Jesus would then invite me into more and more and more. The lives of people that I have had the opportunity to baptize, the marriages I've had to see miraculously restored, the people that I've had the opportunity to watch them step into faith with Jesus, the people that I've walked through really, really tough, heart-wrenching things, the people I've watched healed as Jesus has miraculously healed them that I can't explain. And all of that comes back to Jesus standing on the other side of my garage and saying, Jeremy, will you follow me even when it's scary? I couldn't imagine having missed this. Disciples always asking the question, what's my next yes? Not when it's just exciting, but when it's scary. The disciples asking, what's my next yes when the yes doesn't feel fair? There's this other episode that we're told about where Jesus has just asked Peter twice, do you love me? And he's getting ready to ask him a third time, but he's gonna put a little twist on this third one. It says this, the third time he said to him, Simon, remember that's Peter, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. And here's where the twist comes. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And then John tells us what Jesus meant by this. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then Jesus said to Peter, follow me. Jesus is literally saying to Peter, hey, because of your yes, if you choose to follow me, because of that yes, where I'm gonna lead you, it's gonna eventuate not in your figurative death, but in your literal death. And look at what Peter's response was to this. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, and we'll skip down to verse 21. When Peter saw him, he asked him, Lord, what about him? Like, Lord, this isn't fair. Why do you tell me I'm gonna have to literally die and it's gonna be a painful death? What about him? If I have to die, why shouldn't everyone else have to die? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. See, it's easy to follow Jesus when it's exciting. But what about when it's scary? When it doesn't feel fair? The disciple is constantly asking the question, what's my next yes? Even when it doesn't feel fair. Lastly, and this isn't an exhaustive list, when the yes, or when I'm the expert. The disciple is regularly asking the question, what's my next step, even when I'm the expert? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there comes these points where we honestly think we know better, right? We do. We all do. We know better. We know our lives. We know it feels like Jesus is missing some of the information, so we need to give it to him. Because I'm the expert. Peter again in a boat on a lake. It seems like all these happen on a boat, on a lake. He's there, and Jesus just finished talking to a group of people. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Look at Simon's response. Look at Peter's response. Peter answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. So let me tell you what Peter's saying right here. He's saying, Jesus, you're a really good teacher. You're a really good rabbi. You teach in ways that I haven't heard anybody else teach before. We all get that, but we're the fishermen. Our family, this is a family business, okay? We've done this for generations, and we've been out here all night. We know when it's time to just clean the nets and go home. But Peter didn't stay there long. But because you say so, I'll let down the nets. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. See, it's easy to follow Jesus when we're excited to say yes to that invitation, when we like where he's leading, when we feel comfortable with where he's leading, but when it's scary, when we don't understand, when it doesn't make sense, when it doesn't feel fair, or when I feel like I'm the expert, when I feel like Jesus is missing some information and he would make a different decision if I just informed him of that, that's when it becomes difficult. But I want you to look, and we could go, I had to cut so much stuff because we could look at time and time and time and time again where the disciples found themselves in one of these places where they didn't understand, where it didn't make sense, where it was scary, where they were the experts, where it didn't seem fair. But every time they said yes, what we see is Jesus step in and with them in this relationship with them, do these unbelievable, amazing things with and through them. And Jesus is saying, I've got the same things, same plans for you. The question is, will we continue to ask the question, what's my next yes? What's my next yes? Even when I don't understand, even when it's scary, even when it doesn't feel fair, even when I'm the expert. What's my next yes? What's my next yes? Maybe your next yes is to say yes to following Jesus for the first time. Maybe he's standing on the shore of your life and you have all these things you don't understand. You don't understand, you're like, it doesn't Genesis 1 talk about like a literal 6 days of creation? How does that fit with evolution and science and all of those kinds of things? Maybe you know saying yes is gonna mean cutting off certain relationships in your life, and that is terrifying to you. Would you be willing to ask the question? Because you can't deny that Jesus is on that shore inviting you, even though you don't understand, even though it's scary. Maybe your next yes is to come up after the service. A guy named Calvin did here at New London in the first service, surrendered his life to Jesus. Maybe that could be you, to say yes for the first time following this service. Maybe for some of you, the next yes is baptism. And you go, that's scary, I don't want to be up in front of people. Can I just do it privately? And you can. But maybe he wants you up here. But what if they ask me to share my story? We might. That might be your next yes. But do we trust Jesus enough, even when it's scary, to say yes? Maybe your next yes is the baptism meeting happens after all the services next week, to sign up and go to that. Maybe you don't understand because you're like, well, I was sprinkled when I was a kid. And I said, okay. Maybe your next yes is just to investigate a little further by showing up to that meeting. Maybe your next yes is to serve. Now, I wanna spend a little bit of time on this one. And here's the deal, I'm trying to get better at something that I'm pretty bad at. And it's this, I have this fear that keeps me from doing this more often, that I never want us to get to the place where you feel like we're asking you to help Blue Ridge out more. Okay, serving is not to help Blue Ridge out more. Serving, as we say it around here, serving is our response to Jesus. How he served us, we get to serve other people. So I have this fear of that you feel like we're asking for help. But on the other side of this, recently I've had several conversations with people who are really plugged in, who own what's happening in and through Blue Ridge, and they've had other conversations. And basically the theme is this, is that there are those of you who love what God is doing and being a part of it. And you look around Blue Ridge and just think everything is working great. And you're asking, and what the conversations have been, would you just share with us when there's a need? Because we want to respond. We just don't know there's always a need, or that when there's a need. Well, this is me trying to get better at that. So I want to highlight one specific area. Be Our Kids. You see, Be Our Kids does an amazing job with our kids back there. They do. And it's not about babysitting them for an hour and 10 minutes. It goes way beyond that. In fact, they don't babysit at all. They try to create excellent, exciting, Jesus-centered environments back there that the kids want to come back to. In fact, I could tell you story after story in my 20 years of being here at Blue Ridge where you didn't want to show back up, but your kids drug you back here. Okay? We've heard it time and time again. You were like, yeah, no, that wasn't that exciting for us. But your kids drug you back here, because they were so excited about what they were experiencing back there. Well, to do that week in and week out, literally takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people back there doing all sorts of things. And recently, while we've never had to turn anyone away who wanted to be a part back there, recently to accomplish that, people have been serving 2 and 3 times both of our campuses each Sunday. And while they are grateful for the opportunity to do that, to serve kids in that way, to serve God in that way, we know it's not sustainable. So maybe your next yes, you sense Jesus on the shore saying, hey, would you serve kids or serve me by serving kids? If that's you, out near Kids Check-In at both of our campuses, their kids' community representatives to help you start that process. Maybe your next yes is to regularly attend this week, or to attend this year. You've done the New Year's thing multiple times. You've shown up and you're good for a few weeks, but it's to commit now to say, I'm gonna regularly be here. In fact, I'm gonna take it a step further, and I'm gonna be a part of groups where I can be known and I can know other people. Maybe that's your next yes. Maybe your next yes is to follow Jesus as he leads into your wallet. And I know that's a touchy subject, but maybe he's inviting you to become a regular tither, to start to give this year sacrificially. Maybe my next yes, I've served faithfully for years, but my next yes is to step up into a new place in leadership, to stop expecting other people to do that, and I'm gonna do it. And you don't feel prepared, you don't feel like you understand, you don't feel like you know enough, and Jesus is saying, no, just trust me. Maybe your next yes this year is to do for the one what you've been dreaming of doing for the multitudes. You've got these big dreams that someday, one day, I'll do this for all of them over there. And Jesus is saying, hey, would you just maybe do for the one what you wish you could do for everyone? Maybe your next yes is to follow and to begin to serve with some of our local partnerships. Bedford Elementary School, the Blue Ridge Pregnancy Centers, the Agape Center that's reaching out to financially strapped, under-resourced people. Safe Families that's helping keep kids from entering the foster care system. Are we willing to ask the question, what's my next yes? In large part, what we experience with God will be governed by our response. Either lifeless religion or a life-giving relationship. What's my next yes? Would you pray with me? Jesus, thank you for the invitation over and over and over again by you to continue to join you in what you're doing. Thank you for the fact that you could do this alone, but you choose not to, because that's how much you think of us. Jesus, could we lean into that and trust you enough to say yes when we don't understand, when it's scary and full of fear, when it doesn't seem fair, when I'm the expert? would we respond by saying yes to that next thing you invite us into? As we sing this song, would you imprint on our heart what it is you want to do and where you're inviting us to go? It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.